Aeroflot Flight 593, a seemingly routine flight from Moscow to Hong Kong on March 23, 1994, ended in tragedy, providing critical lessons for the aviation industry. Operated by Aeroflot, Russia's national airline, the flight was aboard an Airbus A310-304, carrying 63 passengers and 12 crew members. This state-of-the-art aircraft represented the modernization of Aeroflot's fleet, as the airline transitioned from older Soviet-era planes to more technologically advanced Western-made aircraft. However, the disaster that unfolded on this flight was not due to mechanical failure or inclement weather, but a tragic combination of human error and unfamiliarity with advanced technology. The crash would forever change cockpit protocols and pilot training practices, serving as a grim reminder of the importance of strict discipline and thorough understanding of automated systems. At the time of the incident, Aeroflot was undergoing significant changes. As part of its efforts to modernize and compete internationally, the airline had recently incorporated the Airbus A310 into its fleet. These aircraft were far more advanced than the Soviet-era planes that many Aeroflot pilots were accustomed to flying. The A310 featured highly sophisticated autopilot and navigation systems designed to handle long flights with minimal manual input from the flight crew. While these technological advancements offered many safety benefits, they also introduced complexities that required extensive training. The journey of Flight 593 was routine in nature. The flight departed from Moscow's Sheremetyevo International Airport en route to Hong Kong, covering a vast distance over Siberia's frozen, remote landscape. With the autopilot engaged, the flight crew expected a largely uneventful journey. The flight was staffed by an experienced crew, including a captain with thousands of hours of flight time, a co-pilot, and a relief crew. However, this flight would soon deviate from routine due to a momentary lapse in cockpit discipline, a decision that seemed harmless at the time but would prove catastrophic. The flight took off smoothly, and the aircraft ascended to cruising altitude without issue. As the flight progressed over Siberia, the captain made a seemingly innocent decision that would set the stage for disaster. He invited his 2 children, a son and a daughter, into the cockpit, allowing them to experience the thrill of aviation firsthand. At the time, it was not uncommon for pilots to bring family members into the cockpit during long-haul flights. Although discouraged, this practice had not yet been strictly prohibited, particularly on flights that seemed routine. With the autopilot engaged, the captain's children were each allowed to sit in the pilot's seat. The atmosphere in the cockpit became more relaxed as the children, particularly the captain's son, showed interest in the aircraft's controls. In the process, the captain's son inadvertently applied pressure to the control yoke. What followed was a small but significant action. This pressure caused the lateral control of the autopilot to disengage. The Airbus A310's autopilot system was designed to allow for partial disengagement. In this case, while the autopilot continued to manage altitude and speed, the lateral navigation responsible for maintaining the plane's left-right trajectory was turned off. Crucially, there was no clear audible alert or visible warning to indicate to the crew that the autopilot had partially disengaged. The plane began a slow, subtle drift to the right, which went unnoticed by the crew for a critical period. As Flight 593 continued its course over the desolate expanse of Siberia, the aircraft began to bank slowly to the right. This bank was subtle enough that the crew did not initially realize anything was amiss. The crew, accustomed to Soviet-era planes with simpler autopilot systems, did not recognize the significance of the partial disengagement. In Soviet aircraft, autopilot disengagement was typically total, immediately returning the aircraft to manual control. However, the Airbus A310 system allowed for partial disengagements, meaning some systems remained active while others were turned off. The crew's unfamiliarity with this feature of the A310 contributed to their inability to detect the problem. The bank angle gradually increased, but the autopilot continued to manage altitude and speed, masking the underlying issue. The lack of an audible warning for the lateral autopilot disengagement further delayed the crew's recognition of the growing problem. By the time the aircraft reached a 45-degree bank, the situation had escalated into a dangerous scenario. The crew's initial response was to correct what they believed to be a minor deviation in the flight path. However, their attempts to counter the bank were based on an incorrect assumption that the autopilot was still fully engaged. As a result, their corrective actions were ineffective and, in some cases, worsened the aircraft's orientation. Without understanding that the autopilot's lateral control had disengaged, the crew was effectively working against the aircraft's automated systems, making the situation increasingly perilous. As the bank angle continued to increase, the aircraft began to enter a spiral descent. The growing tilt caused significant G-forces to act on the plane, pressing the crew into their seats and making control inputs more difficult. The situation inside the cockpit became increasingly frantic as the crew attempted to regain control of the aircraft. However, the combination of unfamiliar technology, the subtlety of the problem, and the physical forces acting on the crew made effective recovery nearly impossible. The crew's efforts to correct the aircraft's orientation only exacerbated the problem. Their lack of familiarity with the Airbus A310 systems meant that their actions, while well-intentioned, were not aligned with the actual nature of the issue. As the aircraft continued its spiral descent, the physical forces acting on it became more extreme. The aircraft's bank angle increased to the point where it entered a stall, a dangerous condition where the plane's nose pitches up sharply, causing a loss of lift and rapid descent. The pilots, physically overwhelmed by the G-forces and disoriented by the situation, were unable to pull the aircraft out of the stall. Each attempt to regain control of the plane only intensified the situation. The mismatch between their manual inputs and the autopilot's remaining functions created a scenario where their corrective actions felt ineffective and contradictory. As the aircraft plummeted toward the ground, the situation in the cockpit turned from confusion to desperation. The pilots, highly experienced though they were, found themselves battling both the physical forces of the spiral descent and their own lack of understanding of the Airbus A310's automated systems. Communication within the cockpit became difficult as the noise of alarms, the physical pressure of the G-forces, and the overwhelming complexity of the situation created an environment of chaos. The crew's final attempts to recover the aircraft involved more aggressive maneuvers, as they desperately tried to level the wings and pull the plane out of its descent. Tragically, these efforts were too little, too late. The aircraft had entered a full stall, and the lack of lift meant that recovery was no longer possible. In those final moments, the pilots were physically and mentally overwhelmed by the situation, unable to reverse the plane's deadly trajectory. At approximately 12:58 a.m. local time, Aeroflot Flight 593 crashed into a remote, snow-covered hillside in Siberia. The impact was devastating, and the aircraft broke apart upon contact with the ground. All 75 people on board minus 63 passengers and 12 crew members were killed instantly. The crash site was located in a remote area, far from any populated regions, which delayed rescue and recovery efforts. It took hours for search teams to reach the site, where they found the wreckage scattered across the snow-covered landscape, with no survivors. The tragedy sent shockwaves through the aviation industry and left families devastated. The crash of Flight 593 was not caused by mechanical failure or bad weather, but by a combination of human error and the crew's lack of familiarity with the Airbus A310's advanced automated systems. The disaster underscored the critical importance of proper training and strict adherence to cockpit protocols, particularly when flying highly automated aircraft. The investigation into the crash of Aeroflot Flight 593 revealed several critical factors that contributed to the disaster. The most significant finding was that the autopilot had partially disengaged when the captain's son inadvertently applied pressure to the controls. The lateral autopilot, which controlled the aircraft's left-right movements, had disengaged without the crew's knowledge, and the absence of an audible or visual warning meant that the crew did not detect the problem in time. The investigation also highlighted the crew's unfamiliarity with the Airbus A310's advanced systems. While the pilots were highly experienced in flying Soviet-era aircraft, they had not received sufficient training on the specific features and potential failure modes of the A310. In particular, the partial disengagement of the autopilot was a feature unique to the Airbus that the crew did not fully understand. This gap in knowledge was a critical factor in the crew's delayed and ineffective response to the escalating situation. The investigators recommended several key changes to prevent similar accidents in the future. First, they called for more comprehensive training programs for pilots transitioning to advanced aircraft like the Airbus A310. These training programs would need to include scenarios that simulated partial autopilot disengagements and other complex failure modes, ensuring that pilots were fully prepared to manage these situations. Additionally, the investigation recommended improvements to the design of the Airbus A310's warning systems, suggesting that clearer alerts be implemented to notify crews of any changes in the autopilot's status. The crash of Aeroflot Flight 593 had a profound and lasting impact on aviation safety. One of the most immediate changes was the introduction of stricter rules regarding cockpit access. The practice of allowing non-essential personnel, including family members, into the cockpit during flight was banned. This rule has since become a fundamental part of aviation safety protocol, ensuring that the cockpit remains a controlled and focused environment throughout the flight. In addition to changes in cockpit access, the investigation's findings led to significant improvements in pilot training. Airlines worldwide, including Aeroflot, began implementing more extensive training programs focused on upset recovery. Techniques training designed to prepare pilots for handling unusual flight attitudes and emergency situations, such as stalls or spirals. These programs emphasize the importance of understanding how modern automated systems work and how to manage them effectively in a crisis. The legacy of Flight 593 also reinforced the importance of communication and discipline in the cockpit. While automation has brought significant improvements in aviation safety, it also requires that pilots remain vigilant and fully aware of the systems they are working with. The human element in aviation remains critical, as even the most advanced technology cannot replace the need for rigorous training and strict adherence to protocols. Aeroflot Flight 593 serves as a stark reminder of the dangers associated with human error, technological unfamiliarity, and a breakdown in cockpit discipline. The disaster highlighted the importance of proper pilot training and adherence to strict safety protocols, particularly when flying advanced, highly automated aircraft like the Airbus A310. While the crash claimed 75 lives, it also led to lasting improvements in aviation safety, helping to prevent similar accidents in the future. The lessons learned from this tragedy have had a profound impact on the aviation industry, leading to changes in cockpit protocols, pilot training programs, and aircraft design. Today, the legacy of Flight 593 continues to influence aviation safety practices, reminding pilots and airlines alike that while technology can enhance safety, it cannot replace the need for vigilance, discipline, and thorough training. If you found this analysis insightful, please like, subscribe, and click the bell for more in-depth aviation stories. Let's learn from these moments and honor the lives lost by fostering safer skies.